Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Also those with AC Bhaktivinoda Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Namachara Haridas Thakur Ki Jai, Prem Sagahal Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasri Gaur Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai, Shri Sri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopida Shama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai, Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai, Navadip Dham Ki Jai, Ganga Jamuna Tulasi Bhakti Devi Ki Jai, Ananda Koti Vaishnava Ki Jai, Samaveta Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai, Go Premanandi. All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to Shri Guru and Shri Guranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. 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 Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswata Deve Gauravani Prachadane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatadesha Tarane Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasri Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 19, verse 29. Sa Vishnu Titaya Agataya Tasmai Sapariyam Sirasa Jahara. Patonavritaya Buddhastriyor Baka. Mahasane Sopavivesha Pujata. Sa, he, Vishnu Rata, Maharaj Parikshit, Titaye, to become a guest, Hagataya, one who arrived, Tasmai, unto him, Saparayam, with the whole body, the Sirasa, with bowed head, Ajahara, offered obeisances, Tatha, thereafter, Nivritta, ceased, he, certainly, Abuddha, less intelligent, Striya, women, Arbaka, boys, Mahasane, exalted seat, Sa, he, Upavivesha, sat down, Pujata, being respected. Translation: Maharaj Parikshit is also known as Vishnu Rata, one who was always protected by Vishnu, bowed his head to receive the chief guest, Sukadeva Goswami. At that time, all the ignorant women and boys ceased following Srila Sukadeva. Receiving respect from all, Sukadeva Goswami took his exalted seat. Purport on Sukadeva Goswami's arrival at the meeting: everyone except Srila Vyasadeva Narada and a few others stood up, and Maharaj Parikshit, who was glad to receive a great devotee of the Lord, bowed down before him with all the limbs of his body. Sukadeva Goswami also exchanged the greetings and reception by embrace, shaking hands, nodding and bowing down, especially before his father and Narada Muni. Thus, he was offered the presidential seat at the meeting. When he was so received by the kings and sages, the street boys and less intelligent women who followed him were struck with wonder and fear. So they retired from the frivolous activities, and everything was full of gravity and calm. Translation: Maharaj Parikshit, who is also known as Vishnu Rata, one who was always protected by Vishnu, bowed his head to receive the chief guest, Sukadeva Goswami. At that time, all the ignorant women and boys ceased following Srila Sukadeva. Receiving respect from all, Sukadeva Goswami took his exalted seat. So the previous verse described how, continuing the description of Sukadeva Goswami's very auspicious characteristics. After that description, then it is explained that all of the great sages could understand by his characteristics that he was the greatest among them, and so they all rose from their seats to respect him. And then this verse describes how Parikshit Maharaj also respected Sukadeva Goswami, and then he had him seated properly on a huge seat, it says Mahasana, and in this way he got ready to speak. So the point here is one that all the great personalities were able to recognize him. Others could not recognize him, and that's described here also, the women and children. They couldn't recognize Sukadeva Goswami, so they were making fun of him. Except when all the sages rose from their seats as he entered, Then the women and children understood, oh, we've done something wrong. And they immediately stopped and they backed off and went away. So they couldn't recognize him. But these great sages could recognize him. So I mentioned previously that it often takes a great personality to recognize the great qualities of another person. People have different levels of consciousness and they can only see in terms of that. So a person of low consciousness, he looks at people and he will admire low qualities, and he will see people with those qualities, he'll give respect to those people. And he won't give respect to other people. In this way, on the other hand, we find that people who are very elevated in their minds, they will give respect to other people who are peaceful, elevated, and have sense control, etc. And they'll give less respect to the people who cannot control themselves. So this is natural within society. People gravitate to certain levels, and they think in terms of that, their sangha, who they're associated with. They choose their particular level of association, and they have those values, and they give respect within those values, and anything other than that they don't give much respect to. The unfortunate thing about this is that we have different levels, and there are superior levels and less levels. It's not that everything's equal, that all levels of consciousness are equal. There are higher levels and lower levels. And so in terms of Vedic analysis, we have gunas. So at the bottom we have tamagun. Of course, everything's in gunas, but among human beings, we have the tamagun people, which means the mode of darkness and ignorance. So these are people who have no spiritual inclination at all, no idea about it, no interest in it, and they're completely attached to their material bodies and the enjoyments of their material bodies. And they can think only in terms of what is beneficial, the immediate benefit of their body. So these are the people in Tamagun. And they will associate and make friends with other people of that group. And they'll have a nice time together, enjoying together, and talking on that level of, immediate enjoyment and comforts of life, etc. And they have very short-term goals, and they think in terms of short-term benefits. Whatever they can get immediately is good. Whatever it's going to take, a long time to get, they won't consider that at all. So they have to do some austerity. They don't want to do that. You tell them to control the senses, they can't do that. So that we find even now when everyone's locked up here and you close all the pubs and the gambling houses and all that, everyone freaks out. They can't control themselves anymore. So this is the Tamagun level of consciousness. When people are on that level, very difficult for them to do anything except these activities, which are ultimately not very productive at all for anything. So that's one level. That's considered the lowest level. The intermediate level is, we can say, the normal social level, where people have goals, and for those goals they're willing to sacrifice things, and they work very hard to achieve their goals in life. People save up and go to university, and they go to university and then they get a job, and then they save the money to buy a house, and they're a little more organized in how they want to lead their life. They have certain goals, and they're willing to sacrifice and control their senses to attain those goals. These are the people in Rajagun, which means the mode of passion. They have a goal they're attached to, and they have the intelligence to try to achieve that goal, and they have persistent intelligence to achieve that goal. So we'd say it's better than the people in Tamagun, because at least they have a goal, and they're driven by that goal, and they're willing to renounce things in order to get that goal. So they accomplish more in this world because of that, and they get more respect because of that. So they're called Rajagun. And we can say this is the majority, a large portion of societies on this level at least. Governments in general try to get people up to that level. Education system is geared for that level also. And then we have Sattvagun, which is the mode of goodness, or the mode of equilibrium. which is considered to be superior to the other modes of material nature. So people in sattva are very peaceful. They're not much attached to enjoyments of the material body and the frivolous activities of this world. They understand that the goal of life is not simply to enjoy. Rather, they understand there must be a higher goal, and they start seeking that goal. So these are the persons who get involved in some spiritual life. And they sometimes, we're not the body, we're something else. And this gets into the idea of Atma Gyan, or knowledge of the soul, that we are actually eternal and we go beyond birth and death, and so we should try to realize that we're the soul, we're not the body. So there's a very basic level of spiritual understanding. So those who are in sattva gun will go in this direction. They may not even be conscious of it. They just understand that I'm not so much into all of this, enjoyment of the world, etc., and there must be something else there. But they're not, maybe not even aware of where they're going, but at least they have an idea that there's something else here in life, higher goals, not lower goals. And if they're a little more astute, then they start seriously practicing spiritual life of some sort, and trying to recognize, some eternal spiritual values. Some people may practice religion, but it's actually in the lower modes. It's not really motivated by this idea that I'm not the material body and I'm something eternal. It's more, the religion is motivated by Rajagun itself to achieve material goals. So that's not, when we talk about spirituality, it's not that level. It's the level of actually understanding internally that we're not the material body, we're something else. So that's what we call sattva gun. There are much fewer people on this level who are in the sattva mode. And within the Varnashram society, these are divided up into the groups. We have the Sudra level who are in ignorance. We have the Vaishya who are real passionate and trying to achieve their money. And we have the Kshatriya group who are the controllers of those people, trying to keep everybody under control and taxing them, and etc., to keep the society together, also in Rajagun. But they have a little sattva also. And then we have the sattvic people who are called the Brahmanas. So in the Vedic system, the Brahmanas have to go to the Vedas to get their spiritual knowledge. And then they understand very clearly that you're not the body or the soul, etc. So we have these types of people in society, and they naturally group together and form groups. So we have the sattvic people together, the Brahmanas grouping together, and they stay among themselves and make their own communities. We have the Sudras all together making their communities. We have the Vaishyas with their communities, and we have the Kshatriyas with their communities. So that is, in India, still see that to some degree. They still act within their group. If they're Kshatriya group, they stay within that group, or with the Brahmins, they stay with the Brahmins, etc. And it was more so in ancient times, where the groups were quite separated and distinct. Now it's beginning to merge together. But anyway, we have these different groups of people, and then within each group, their values are different. And therefore, who they respect and what their goals are also different. The majority of the population is at the bottom. Tamagun and Rajagun, ignorance and passion, that's the most of the society. So they are the majority. So those will be the most prominent goals within the society. It doesn't mean it's the best, but it's what's most prominent. So if the people on the lower level have the most voice, then they will influence the whole society and the government, etc., to act on that one level, and they will give respect to people who are of that quality. Which, as I said, may not be the best thing, but nevertheless, this is what happens in a democratic society, at least. So we end up with leaders who may not have the best qualities at all, but it's the qualities that the people at a certain level admire. And therefore they'll put them in power. So in this way, we have society in the modern world acting according to this principle of recognizing greatness in terms of the gunas of material nature, and then they put someone in charge of those qualities that they admire. But from the spiritual point of view, as we see here, that though we give respect to all human beings, we have to even go beyond this small group, the Brahminical group, and get to a higher level of pure spiritual life. These are all material levels I'm speaking about, goodness, passion, and ignorance. But above that is the pure spiritual level, so that's the highest level of all, and it's the rarest. Yeah? But here we had a unique situation where we had Parikshit Maharaj, who was a king, who was the Kshatriya group and passion goodness group, but he was also a great devotee of the Lord, so he was also on the spiritual level. And then we have all the sages, the majority who were on the spiritual level also. And we have Sukadeva Goswami, who was on the most exalted spiritual level. So because they were all spiritual, they could recognize Sukadeva Goswami. He's the best of all of the spiritual people, because they did have that level of spiritual life. If they had been Tamagun and Rajagun as the women and children were, that they wouldn't recognize Sukadeva Goswami at all. But because he was recognized by the sages, they could recognize it. Then he was greatly respected. So according to the types of people then, or consciousness of people, they can understand the good qualities of other personalities. And they understood the wonderful qualities of Sukadeva Goswami, that is spiritual qualities. And he was on an exalted spiritual level. And therefore they offered respects. So the offering of respects is something which is quite often emphasized in the spiritual literature. We see here that Maharaj Parikshit, who's the king, and therefore, in one sense, the most powerful person in the whole world, he's offering respects to a naked sage who was being insulted by the women and children as being a madman. So Parikshit Maharaj understands his true exalted nature and is not worried about social etiquette or social custom or anything. He understands this exalted spiritual nature of Sukadeva Goswami, therefore he offers respects. So respect, as I said, is often mentioned in the Vedic literatures because it is necessary to give respect in order to gain knowledge, in order to gain benefit. You have to give respect. So we see that in the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna says that someone is tattvavit, he knows the truth, he has knowledge. So how do you approach him? You have to approach in a very humble mood. It's called in Bhagavad Gita pranipatena. Pranipat means to fall down on the ground like a stick. So that's the approach one has to take. If someone has knowledge and you want that knowledge, then you have to give proper respect. And you have to put yourself on a lower level and admit, I don't have any knowledge. Then you can get knowledge. If you think I've got the knowledge, then you're not going to get any knowledge from somebody else. So we have to admit, I don't have any knowledge. Okay? So the graphic representation of that is falling on the ground like a stick. So it means, I surrender, I don't know anything. And therefore, you should enlighten me, give me some knowledge, give me some guidance. So we see that repeated over and over when Sanatana and Rupa Goswamis approached Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. It says that they approached on the ground with grass in their mouths. I don't know what's literal or not, but they often use that term. He approaches with grass in his mouth, which means he's just like an animal crawling on the ground, like a cow eats grass like that. So little dirt and grass in his mouth, and he's on the ground. So that means great humility. With great humility, Rupa and Sanatana approached Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But Rupa and Sanatana actually were very knowledgeable. They knew Sanskrit, they knew Bengali, they knew Persian, they knew a lot of things. They knew philosophy, they knew logic, they knew sciences. They were vastly learned, and they had come from exalted Brahmin families originally, though they were employed by the Muslim government. But nevertheless, they were highly learned people. And we can see that because when they went to Vrindavan, then they began writing in Sanskrit. And what did they write? They were writing commentaries on books like Bhagavatam and other things, and quoting so many different scriptures. So they had so much knowledge in their heads at that time. Sitting in a little cottage and writing on palm leaf manuscript, on palm leaves, these Sanskrit things, and thousands of pages they're writing with great knowledge of all these different scriptures. So they had great knowledge, but they were coming to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu like beggars or something like that on the ground, crawling on the ground, asking him for mercy. So that is the proper approach to get knowledge. If we understand a person does have knowledge, and we want that knowledge, we have to put ourselves in the position we don't have knowledge at all. We have no qualification at all. So we have to lower ourselves in front of that person. So that is Pranipad, mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita, taking a very humble attitude to get the knowledge. And if we don't have that attitude, then we cannot get the knowledge. So that's why we always have the pranama. Pranama again means falling down, pranama. And we have the pranama prayers, Namo Vishnupadaya, etc. We recite every day. This again is acknowledging our humble position in front of a person who has more knowledge. So we offer our respects to Guru. So Guru means a person who has that higher knowledge that we don't have. And in order to get that knowledge and guidance, then we have to offer our respects properly. So that is one thing one has to do then, the offering of proper respects and to show the humility. So the external is there, of course, of offering respects on the ground, but even more important than that is the mentality itself. You can always go through the actions of offering respects without being humble at all. Your mind could be somewhere else, but the idea is that the act itself is accompanied by the proper attitude. Then it becomes very powerful. So along with the offering of respects on the ground is the being humble and admitting oneself in a lower position, and that way it's a favorable attitude for receiving knowledge. So though the other person is in no way proud and does not like to get respected, like Sukadeva Goswami is not feeling very nice by being respected by Parikshit. I got the king bowing down before me. He's not on a power trip or anything. It's a necessity for Maharaj Parikshit to do this because he has to get some enlightenment knowledge, so therefore he's following the procedure, and Sukadeva is respecting that. So that's one of the qualifications. The other, of course, is mentioned in Bhagavad Gita, and that is pariprashana, which means thorough questioning. So this means a person who wants knowledge has to have a desire for that knowledge, even in the material world. If you go to university and you don't want to learn anything, you're not going to learn anything. If you really want to learn something, then you'll learn it, and you do well at it. But if you have no desire to learn anything, you're not going to get it. So in surrendering to a guru, then one should have a real desire for advancing in spiritual life. And if we don't have that, then what's the use of surrendering to a guru at all? So pariprashana means we're eager to ask questions about how to advance in spiritual life. How can we raise ourselves from our low position and become detached from everything, become completely attached to the Supreme Lord? What is the process for doing that? So if we have that desire for that knowledge, that's our qualification. So as well as the humility, then we have to have that desire for the knowledge. Humility without desire for knowledge isn't going to lead where not too far anyway. So we have to do the two things together. And so that combination is very, very necessary. So in the example of Rupa and Sanatan, they came very humbly, and then they made the request, you please tell us how to get out of this material world, the miseries of samsara, the miseries of the material world, and develop attachment to Krishna. So that is the basic request to bring us closer to Krishna. So that desire for spiritual advancement has to be there also. And if those things are there, then the teacher or the guru, in this case Sukadeva Goswami, is very pleased. Parikshit Maharaj asked the question, what should I do now that I'm about to die? What is the best thing to do? That was his inquiry. So Sukadeva Goswami was very enthusiastic. Here's a person who is humble. Here's a person who is very inquisitive, wants to know. And so he began to speak the Bhagavatam in the second canto of Bhagavatam. So these are two necessary qualifications. The other qualification mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita is seva, service. So one should be humble and one should be inquisitive, but one should also do service. And that example is given in the case of Krishna and Balaram in the Gurukul. Gurukul was where you get the knowledge. So the parents, Vasudeva and Devaki, thought Krishna has to get educated, even though he doesn't need any education because he's the Supreme Lord. So they went to send him to school for a few months. So they sent Krishna and Balaram to the Gurukul to get some Vedic knowledge from Sandipani Muni. Yeah? So they were ideal students. Yeah? And of course they learned very nicely, and they absorbed all the knowledge very nicely, and they gave very great respect to Sandipani Muni, and they served him. Yeah? So how did they serve him? So the famous example is that they would go every day and they would collect firewood in the forest and come back with the firewood and then give that to the guru, and then with that firewood he would light the fires for the daily sacrifices they would do. So that's the traditional service of the brahmacharis in the ashram. They go out and collect firewood every day for the guru. So this is exactly what Krishna and Balaram did. Even though they're the supreme lords, they go out collecting wood in the forest, you know. And then one time it was a big storm out when they went to collect the wood. And they got trapped in the forest, and it was raining and everything like that, and they didn't come back or whatever. And later they came back or whatever, but they endured all of the hardships of doing that menial service for the guru. Yeah? So service, therefore, is also very important for the person who wants to get knowledge. If they just want to learn without even doing anything for the guru, then they also don't achieve too much. So they have to actually serve the guru in various ways. But of all the services, the main service is to learn properly and then to implement into action. It's not just book knowledge. One has to implement in life. So there has to be a change within the person himself. Through that knowledge, that they begin to do something, to manifest, so they can get to the goal. They have to do something. So they have to act in a certain way in order to achieve the goal. So that's, we say, the service, to follow the instructions of the guru in order to achieve the goal. How to worship the Lord, how to control oneself, etc. All these things are also the service of the person. So these three things are necessary in order to get proper knowledge and make it practical so we can develop. In this particular case, they were all on the very high level, and all the sages could recognize the exalted nature of Sukadeva Goswami because they were also on a high level, so they could appreciate his level. And Parikshit Maharaj also, though he was on a lower level because he was the king, he was not like a sage or a Brahmin, he was a Kshatriya, but he was on an exalted level also, spiritually speaking, because he was an exalted devotee of the Lord. So he recognized also the exalted nature of Sukadeva Goswami, and he offered respects, and then he was willing to hear from him. Among all the different sages, he chose him to be his instructor and guru. Okay, any question now?
Earlier you mentioned that people with a higher consciousness can recognize other people with a higher consciousness and vice versa at a lower consciousness. And so in Vedic times, when the Brahmins were in charge, I'm wondering, was there like an election process? How do people recognize the Brahmins as
Of course, in Bhagavad Gita we say guna and karma. The Varna is determined by guna, which means qualities. And karma means actions, how you conduct yourself in life. So by that, each particular Varna, the Brahmins have certain qualities and certain activities they should do. And if one naturally has those qualities, one becomes Brahmana. Or a Kshatriya, he has his qualities, like lording it over people, liking to control people, having very good determination, sense control, generosity, etc. So he has a certain set of qualities and actions to go with him. So if a person, when they're adult, manifests these qualities, and they're in that particular Varna. Added to that is the birth aspect, which became very prominent in India. So people in Brahmin families became Brahmanas also. It's hoped that they will develop the same qualities of a Brahmana and do the activities of a Brahmana. It doesn't happen in all cases, unfortunately, but they just began to identify according to birthright the Varna for that reason. And then they would socialize within those particular families, Brahmins with Brahmins, and Kshatriyas with Kshatriyas, and Vaishyas with Vaishyas, etc., and Sudras with Sudras. Yeah. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur says the birth aspect, by family, has become more prominent in Kali Yuga. It's more or less an easy way of doing it. But in previous times, it had more significance. It worked okay, but in Kali Yuga, it doesn't work too well. Because we have so much outside influence that can affect the person, and the society itself is disturbed, so it's not predictable that Brahmins are going to give birth to Brahmana-type children. The castes also get mixed up, and then the environment's mixed up, the education system's mixed up, so there's so many influences now that it's very difficult to predict on birth the qualities of a person. There's too many other factors involved nowadays.
So when it was like a Vedic times, there was clear distinctions, like Kshatriya, Brahmins. How did the Kshatriyas recognize the qualities of the Brahmins if you can only recognize some based on their consciousness?
Who was the judge? In other words, you're saying who judged who was what?
Like the Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, how did they recognize the Brahmins to be like the head, to be most qualified?
Well, as I said, in ancient times it was largely by birth also. That naturally, when they took birth in the Brahmin families, they did develop those qualities. When it comes to Kali Yuga, not so evident. But sometimes, if they may be born in a Kshatriya family, they may show Brahminical qualities. So then they became sages also. Sometimes the Kshatriyas become sages. In spite of the fact they were born in a lower caste, they would become sages if they had those qualities. Or if they were in a higher level and then they showed qualities of not Brahmins, then they would act as a Kshatriya or something.
Question. In our society, it's quite unique. I'm talking about ISKCON society, we have Diksha gurus, who sometimes are Siksha as well. They're Siksha gurus, and we're the preeminent Siksha gurus who will pass on these teachings. So my question is, when you either in a formal situation like this or outside the temple, if you have a Sikh devotion that says something that's contrary.
What's that?
Contrary to what the Srila Prabhupada's books. How do you deal with it externally, internally, when they're saying something that you've read in black and white? In other words, they might have a mistake, or it might be a simplification, you misunderstand yourself. So how do you deal with... I've heard things sometimes, very rarely, saying that she'll come and say something.
Okay. How do you agree?
I go and read it, so how do you deal with that situation in terms of humility?
Okay. Well, we do have a scripture, so if it's contrary to the scripture itself, then there's a little problem there. And if it's a significant mistake or thing, then we have to somehow resolve that issue, especially if it gets propagated and it looks like it's against the scripture, then we do have to bring it up as something rather. So, yeah, they may be in a higher position of authority, but nevertheless, if there is some mistake, it should be dealt with in a proper way, that's all. It's how we deal with it, I think, is more important than it should be dealt with if there is something contrary, but how to deal with it, then we have to do it in the proper way, that's all.
What's the etiquette in the class situation? You wait till after class and approach?
Probably do it in private rather than start an argument in class, which may not be too productive.
The sages, they recognized Sukha Goswami and described that they understood the art of physiology.
Yeah.
So how useful are those nowadays, being able to understand what omens mean and
Well, it has everything has some use. We may not be able to use it properly because we don't have the thorough science. Like astrology, we know something, but we don't have the thorough science as it was, a few thousand years ago, so we can't make such accurate predictions. We have Ayurvedic medicine, and we probably can't cure as well as they could cure a few thousand years ago because the medicines are not proper anymore, and the doctors also are not probably the most skillful either. So, but nevertheless, we can try to use some of the principles there in our life also, so to some degree we can use it. And we can say that's there with all these different sciences. Even that's there with modern knowledge. To some degree it's there, but it's not perfect. So right now they're struggling with the vaccine. Is this one good or is this one bad? Is it going to work or is it not? But they don't even know if it's going to work or not. So it's a little bit of, hit and miss, even in modern science as well. They don't quite, know. They couldn't figure out the whole virus for a long time. They still can't. Should we use masks or not use masks? Should we use distancing or no distancing? And they still don't. Even scientists will argue over this still now. So there's so many things that are a little bit vague, and you can't come to conclusions on even modern science. What to speak of, ancient sciences like that. So to some degree we can use these things, but nothing is perfect. And as I previously mentioned, physiognomy is one thing, but we'd have to be very expert because someone could have a lot of those qualities, but external qualities, physiognomy qualities, by which you could tell this person's got, auspicious qualities, but internally they could be completely rotten. So and we have to consider that also. We see that in the modern world. People look nice, but then when you speak to them and understand their qualities, then you understand their character is something else. So it doesn't always match up in the modern world particularly, but I would suppose in ancient times it did. As well, they could probably understand by some qualities also if they had these internal qualities as well. So that would be some aspect, but probably more subtle. Not just how big your ear is or what shape your eyes are, but there would be some other qualities also there to indicate your inner nature as well. Okay, Hare Krishna.